Afternoon. I know that sometimes after lunch energy levels wane a little bit, but this crowd, I don't think so. I'm feeling the energy. Are you? Yes. Well, welcome once again to the 32nd anniversary of the Miami Book Fair. I am so pleased to have you here. I'm your room host, Chris Barker. I'm a district director at Miami-Dade College. And as you've probably already seen, there are just a ton of different events for you in the schedule for you to choose from today. So many venues, including the Children's Alley, programs in the Swamp, the Porch for Children, and much, much more. Please consider becoming a friend of the book fair if you haven't already. Your charitable contributions help to make this event possible, and events throughout the year as well like it. So friends of the book fair actually receive multiple benefits, including preferential seating, admission to special events throughout the year. So thank you to those who have already contributed. This year in particular, you're able to go on your phone and text to 501-501-BOOK. Just text the word book, B-O-O-K, to 501-501, and you're able to donate $10 to make this event possible and many others like it again. So I also want to give a very special thanks to the Knight Foundation, OHL Arellano, and the Bachelor Foundation, and so many more sponsors that help to make this event happen. So please note, the Miami Book Fair does not end tomorrow. It does not end tomorrow. It continues, and programs, events, activities take place throughout the year. We're so grateful in particular to Miami-Dade College and all the hundreds of volunteers that help to make this event possible. So let me share with you that there will be a very brief, about 15 minutes, Q&A after the discussion is held. So please, as the discussion takes place, feel free to jot down your questions so that you're ready and prepared to ask them to the authors when they're done sharing their overview and discussion. So also note that autographs and autograph signing will be available immediately outside the hallway, just a couple tables down. Right after the conclusion of this event, you can actually purchase the text as well. So please stay tuned for that. And then I'd ask you to kindly silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already, so we can minimize any interruptions. And thank you so much for doing that. And now, if you would, just joining me in welcoming a very special guest who will introduce our two authors, someone I don't think you want to mess with. He's the Deputy Chief of Major Crimes at the U.S. Attorney's Office, Mr. Mike Thakur.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. Today's session is on first families, and we have the privilege of having with us today two veteran reporters who have really had a front row seat to recent history. They've got to observe up close the people who have lived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Our first author is Peter Slevin, and he is an associate professor at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Before that, he was on the national staff for over a decade at the Washington Post. He's a graduate of Princeton and Oxford, but he got his start right here in South Florida. He began his career at a small afternoon newspaper in Hollywood, Florida, then moved to the Miami Herald, where he later became the European bureau chief and the chief diplomatic correspondent. His latest book is the first comprehensive biography of Michelle Obama and is entitled appropriately, Michelle Obama, A Life. This book follows Michelle Obama from her upbringing and childhood in the south side of Chicago through the hallowed halls of Princeton and Harvard Law School to the fateful summer of 1989, when she was working as an associate at a big, prestigious law firm in Chicago, and was asked to be a mentor for a new summer associate named Barack Obama. Apparently, it was a pretty good mentorship, and the rest is history, as they say. This book provides a unique perspective on the First Lady's achievements and purpose, and the lessons that she learned in Chicago that really inform who she is as a leader and as a First Lady. Kenneth Walsh is our next author, and he is the chief White House correspondent for U.S. News and World Report. He writes a daily blog for the magazine. He has served as the president of the White House Correspondents Association and has covered every American president since Ronald Reagan. Mr. Walsh has written 6 books on the American presidency, and his latest book is entitled Celebrity in Chief, A History of the Presidents and the Culture of Stardom. This book looks at the American presidents through a different lens and how they measure up or fail as celebrities and the impact and the interaction that they have had with popular culture. The American presidency has always had a certain place in our popular imagination. The stories that we remember about our American presidents, whether they were born in a log cabin, whether they're the man from Hope, or the son of a goat herder from Kenya, these stories reflect as much about how the presidents want us to perceive them as a reflection of the qualities and traits that we think are appropriate at that moment in history. So it's a reflection as much of ourselves as it is of the presidents. And few people tell that story better than our two authors here today. So without further ado, I give you our panel.
Well, thank you for that very good introduction, and Peter and I have figured it'd be best if I go first and then segue into his presentation. I've covered the White House for almost 30 years now. I remember when I first started walking through the Northwest Gate, which is the media entrance, in May of 1986. And it just has struck me all along how our presidents have been celebrities for so very long. We're in such a celebrity-driven culture, and so I thought I'd take a look at how presidents measure up in that way. Ever since the advent of the mass media, presidents basically have started out as celebrities. Some of them lose that quality, some of them continue and expand on that quality and use it for a positive effect. I distinguish in the book between shallow celebrity, which is like a reality show star. I'll come back to that premise in a little bit. There's a certain candidate now who fits into that pretty well. But in order to be a true celebrity in chief, my definition is that you have to represent something larger in the American value system, whether it's strength or diversity or whatever. You have to have a mastery of the media of your time. Some presidents do that a lot better than others. And you have to define yourself in distinctive and positive ways, whether it's optimism, likability, courage, that sort of thing. So I make that distinction between celebrity that's shallow and celebrity that's consequential. It's nice, by the way, to be standing here under the gaze of the Kennedys, because I've given this PowerPoint a number of times, and I have to cut it a little short today. But I wanted to just start with Kennedys as the first celebrity couple, and you can see from this picture, I think, how they filled the bill there. Both of them glamorous, both of them exciting, both of them people who understood that they wanted to be celebrities and knew how to enhance that in our popular culture. Let me make sure I've got this going right here. I got it. Oh, we have a little glitch. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. So anyway, Kennedy managed to intersect with popular culture in many ways. He got to know the main Hollywood and show business celebrities of his time, and they got to know him, and they wanted to be in each other's orbit. This is Kennedy with Frank Sinatra, one of the leading sort of entertainers of his era. He, to some extent, overdid this. At least some people felt at the time, so he started to pull back from it before his assassination. One of the incidents that caused this to happen was the incident with Marilyn Monroe. Remember, Marilyn Monroe appeared at Kennedy's birthday party in Madison Square Garden in New York with 15,000 other people, showed up on the stage with a mink coat, took the coat off, and was in this dress, stitched onto her. She had to have it stitched on. It was that tight. The only picture that I've been able to find of Kennedy with her and his brother Bobby caused quite a sensation at the time, but it was another intersection of Kennedy and popular culture with this sort of siren of the screen. And she sang happy birthday to him. He got up and he said, I want to tell you that I feel like I've reached the height of my life now to have happy birthday sung to me in such a sweet and innocent way. That's exactly the opposite of what she did. If ever you've seen the clip, you know what I'm talking about here. Kennedy also mastered the media of his time. He was a terrific television personality. This is him at a news conference. Very, very good at this. People loved to see Kennedy. He was smart. He was humorous. He was quick on his feet. It was a wonderful experience for people to see a president sort of take over the popular media as he did. He used his family, and I say used advisedly, to promote his image as a family man. This is the kind of image that they allowed to be used of Kennedy. The White House photographers would take pictures like this. This is a picture President Kennedy with his son John Jr. and Caroline with the pony called Macaroni on the south, the colonnade of the White House. They sometimes let this happen. The butlers and valets weren't wild about this because the horses would sometimes leave things behind. But this is another famous picture of Kennedy that we might remember from that era. Kennedy at his desk with John Jr. in the little trap door in the front of the desk to show the president having his son and his presence while he's working. Jackie didn't like these pictures used of the children, so they generally were taken when she was out of town. And then they would release them to the media. But it was effective for Kennedy because he did show that he was a family man, even though he was having trouble in his marriage. So Jack and Jackie Kennedy, the first real celebrity couple in the modern era. President Johnson, he takes office. I'll have to move rather quickly, deference to my co-author, so I don't take too much time. President Johnson was a creature of the Senate. He was a tremendous lobbyist. He was tremendously effective as a senator. He was Kennedy's vice president, took over after Kennedy was assassinated. This is the kind of thing that worked against Johnson. He was not a celebrity president. Initially, he tried to follow Kennedy's legacy, but largely because of the escalation of the Vietnam War, he lost touch with the country and became very unpopular, sort of the anti-celebrity. Part of the reason that he had trouble is he was not a good communicator on television. This is what they call the treatment. He worked very effectively on Capitol Hill, not in the television media visual age. He would invade the personal space of people. Some people stood up to him more than others. This fellow, standing up to him pretty well. This guy's not doing so well. This guy looks like he's about to run out of the room if he could. He's backed up on the desk. So anyway, Johnson, not very good as a celebrity president, not very effective in expanding his celebrity. And by the end of his presidency, you might remember all the trouble he had keeping in touch with the country because of the Vietnam War largely. People tell me today how awful things are, how polarized we are, how nasty we are in politics. But remember the chants that would go up against Johnson during this Vietnam War period when rallies would be held, sometimes violent protests, and the chant was, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" Very, very common in those days. We aren't at that point of nastiness in our politics yet, but that was what LBJ had to deal with. So he's an example of a non-celebrity president. This is the most requested picture in the National Archives of any president. Richard Nixon, not exactly a people person, tried to reach out to his opponents, tried to become more of a public celebrity in the popular culture. He heard that Elvis Presley wanted to come to the White House and get some kind of a law enforcement badge because Elvis was an admirer of police. So they arranged to have Elvis come. Nixon was doubtful about it. He said, "Well, what am I going to talk to this Elvis Presley about? I don't know anything about him. I don't know what I'm going to say to him." The staff said, "It's good. Do it. You look like you're reaching out." The best Nixon could do in the chit-chat was, "That's quite an outfit you have on there, Mr. Presley." And Elvis said, "You have your audience, Mr. President, and I have mine." So it was a very interesting moment. Didn't really work very well for both of them, although Elvis got his badge and Nixon got his picture, but it really, Nixon, in his case, was really not very successful as a celebrity president, and of course had to resign because of the Watergate scandal. And so I'm not going to be able to cover every president, but here's another celebrity president, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a Hollywood movie star. He was a television star. He had hosted Death Valley Days and the General Electric Theater on national television for years. So he was well known as a celebrity himself. He comes into the White House. During his career, he had played football in college. He heard about the script being passed around for a movie called Newt Rockne, All-American, which is about the culture of Notre Dame. There was a character in the movie called George Gipp, who dies, and Reagan wanted to play this part. Very dramatic role. It's a deathbed scene where George Gipp says to the coach of Notre Dame and the students, the players, whenever the boys have their backs against the wall and they need a boost, ask them to win one more for the Gipper, George Gipp. This became his grace note in his political campaign. Whenever he was asking people to do something, he'd say, "Win one more for the Gipper," meaning me, Ronald Reagan. This is a poster of that movie. So early on, he's making the connection between public and private and celebrity and so on. After his assassination attempt, he really does go into the celebrity world even more intensely because he was almost killed in this assassination attempt in 1981. People didn't realize that at the time, but the White House was so effective in capitalizing him as this sort of public figure and a celebrity that they released this kind of a picture, him working out, him sort of magically recovering from from the assassination attempt. So Reagan does maintain his celebrity and in a very personal way. He tries to reach out to popular culture. This is him with Michael Jackson. He's trying to recognize Michael Jackson for his work with young people. Ironic, considering what happened to Michael Jackson. The Reagans don't look like a heck of a lot to say to Michael Jackson here, but by the end of his presidency, Reagan had gotten to the point where he was a very likable, optimistic guy. He had a gift for intersecting popular culture in the sense of being the representative of optimism in the country and likability, and this is a very important trait that we like to have in our presidents. Bill Clinton always wanted to be a celebrity president, always wanted to be a leader of his generation. This is him at Boys Nation, which was an American Legion program at the time. You start at the state level with Boys State, and you move up to Boys Nation. There's also a girls' state at the time. I was actually in Boys State myself, but not in this particular class. And Bill goes to the White House for Boys Nation. He manages to get to the front of the line and meet President Kennedy. He saved this picture all his life and used it in his campaign for president to show he's intersecting with this other celebrity president, passing the torch from one generation to another. Clinton does things that other presidents did not do. In his campaign, he appears on the Arsenio Hall show, playing the saxophone, wearing sunglasses, a huge change. Other presidents did not want to participate in popular culture like this. Bill Clinton did. Didn't do it after he became president. I'll come back to that in a minute, but did it while he was running. This is him on his inauguration night. He's back, Michael Jackson again, looking somewhat different, don't you think, from the earlier Michael Jackson. Diana Ross of the Supremes. Bill Clinton was very, very popular in show business world, and it was, again, the kind of case where they wanted to be part of his charisma, he wanted to be part of theirs, and he was able to channel his popularity into his agenda in many ways. He loved people, he loved to be around people, he loved to campaign, he was very much a people person, but he did run into trouble, of course, with the Monica Lewinsky scandal. This is a whole year. I remember covering all of this, very gruesome time to be covering this stuff. I wrote about things I never thought I'd be writing about in covering the White House. But what Clinton managed to do, a very key change in his leadership and his presidency, is he managed to persuade the country that they should separate his private character from his public policy. So by the end of his presidency, even though he went through a lot of trauma, people felt, well, maybe privately he's a scoundrel or a rascal, but we like his public leadership, the economy is going well, we're not at war in any sustained way. So his approval ratings went up. So he managed to use his celebrity to distinguish between the literal soap opera nature of this Monica Lewinsky scandal and public leadership, a very key distinction that presidents had not made before. This is Clinton today, the most popular Democrat in the country and one of the most popular politicians in the country right now. We're coming up to date now. President Obama, the famous Hope and Change poster, comes into office. From the first day in office, he is a celebrity president. Of course, he's the first African-American president. People have great hope for President Obama. This is him on election night in 2008. Look at how the girls have grown up since then, how amazingly different they are today. Obama's aged, Michelle has aged, and Peter will talk about that in a little while. President Obama has done things that other presidents have not done to stay in touch with the country and to add to his celebrity. He goes out and among the people more than other presidents. He plays pool here in Denver. He likes to participate in the popular media in many ways. Let me see if I can get this to move. There you go. He does the kind of TV and media appearances that other presidents shunned because they thought it might diminish the stature of the presidency. Older folks might not be familiar with this show. Young people are. This is Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis. This is a parody interview show where the host, Zach Galifianakis, insults the guest. So he insults the president insults him back. But President Obama feels he can use this opportunity to sell his health care program to young people who watch this show. It worked. Thousands of people signed up for it. So he continues to do this sort of thing, participating in popular culture, appealing to people where they are, as he says, going to the voters where they are, not just through the mainstream media, but on this kind of show. He does participate in more traditional connections to the Hollywood and celebrity world. This is him with Bruce Springsteen. This is him with Oprah Winfrey. But it's really this notion of the new appeal, the new kind of celebrity president that he is. And I think that from now on, presidents are going to have to do this sort of thing, or they're not going to be effective. And President Obama has pioneered a lot of this in his presidency. Now we're to the campaign. I just want to say this very briefly. President Obama can't run again for another office, another presidency. He's limited to 2 terms. Hillary Clinton at Wellesley College. All through her life, she felt she would be the leader of her generation, particularly among women. She succeeded in doing that. Now she's, after losing to President Obama in 2008, she's back again, the front runner for the Democratic nomination. I don't think she's going to be beaten this time. This is the sense of her as the headline says, Hillary Clinton superstar. When I wrote this book, and completed it a year ago, I anticipated Hillary Clinton would be one of the celebrity politicians running for office. And she is. She is, has a challenge that other candidates have not had. Her husband, of course, was a celebrity. And let me see here. Well, anyway, there you go. Her husband was a celebrity, so she has to decide how closely she steers to his presidency. And her patron, Barack Obama, was a celebrity president because she was his Secretary of State. So how close will she steer toward these 2 presidents? She's trying to establish herself as a celebrity in her own right, separating herself from both of them in different ways, but at the same time not being too distant from them because she doesn't want to lose their support. So she has a challenge, and this is Hillary Clinton today. Again, I think she's going to be the nominee. She's got to decide how to use, not only expand her celebrity, which is pretty strong as it is, but how to harness it in positive ways, which I think has been a bumpy road for her so far. This is, let's see if we can get this to work. Let's see. We're not moving here on the slide. I think he's got a, there we go. Jeb Bush, why don't you hold on because the slide's not moving from up here. Jeb Bush was, I anticipated he would be one of the celebrity candidates next because he comes from a political dynasty. This is him as governor of Florida, your governor. He comes from the dynasty of the Bush family. His father and his brother were president. So he has to decide how much he uses that notion of celebrity in his campaign. Not working out very well. He's like the 5th or 6th guy in the national polls now. So he's not channeling his celebrity very well. He's not building it very well. So this is a case where a guy we expected to have a tremendous celebrity factor, it's not working out for him. Now, this is the guy who is the perfect intersection of celebrity, show business, and politics, Donald Trump. He's caused a lot of sales of my book, by the way, because he is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. This is him as the host of Celebrity Apprentice, the angry, snarling, you're a loser, I'm a winner, you're fired kind of guy. This is exactly the personality he's brought into his presidential campaign. So he's taken a step into another world of celebrity politicians. Like I say, the perfect intersection of show business and politics. And it's been working for him. A lot of people, of us in Washington thought he would have faded and flamed out by now. He's done things that other candidates would have collapsed over. Insulting John McCain for not being a hero, insulting Mexicans for coming across the border and being rapists and murderers, insulting women, making derogatory comments about women, insulting his opponents, one thing after another, but he still draws tremendous crowds. The only crowds that are bigger than his are Bernie Sanders crowds, frankly, on the Democratic side, but that's a limited universe on the left of the Democratic Party. So Donald Trump is going to be testing this notion of celebrity again. His campaign has been rather superficial. We haven't really gotten a lot of detail about what he's trying to do. To some extent, he tries to limit his snarling persona sometimes. This is him in a more mellow moment. Make America Great Again is his slogan. But every time he does this, the last couple of debates, he's been a little bit more moderate, but not so much. So basically, Trump is testing the limits as he seeks the White House. Like I say, yeah, he doesn't seem to be able to get away from the insulting one-liner campaign, and this is going to test the whole limits of celebrity in chief for the foreseeable future. So with that, thank you so much for coming, and I'll take some questions in a while.
Thank you all for coming out. It's great to see you all. I'm particularly pleased that Mike, that I now know what Mike does for a living. I spent a long time over at the federal courthouse, not a block from here. I took a pass by it, and then when I got into the room and was given a cafecito, I thought, I am home again. So that was a very happy, very, very happy moment. It's so interesting to follow Kenneth and this idea of the celebrity celebrities who end up in the White House. It is something that Michelle Obama thinks about, as we all know, when we think about what she's known for, what the kind of basic outlines, the popular outlines of her story are. For her, she set out to be purposeful in her job. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. But she is asked about this juxtaposition, the intersection of celebrity and the popular press, and how she copes with it. Someone who was not elected to the job, didn't ask for the job. In fact, it isn't a job, is it? There's no pay. There's no constitutional authority. She doesn't even have a very big staff, but boy, there she is. And she and Laura Bush were doing a discussion, and someone pointed out that it's a prison in the White House. It's this odd world, that a comment that had been made long ago, and by Martha Washington, who was the first lady, so it's been around a long time. And it was at a moment, you might remember, in 2013 when she cut her hair. She had bangs. This was a dramatic moment because Michelle Obama, oh my God, she cut her hair. She has bangs. What is she? And so somebody asked her about that, and she said, you know, I think about this a lot. She said, as first ladies, we take our bangs, we take the things people are paying attention to, and we stand in front of important things. And after a while, people stop looking at our bangs and they pay attention to the important things. That is how she sees her role. I think it's important to remember that Michelle Obama arrived in the White House without a map 7 years ago. She had signed on, possibly somewhat reluctantly, to her husband's bid for the White House. And when she arrived, she had given up a formidable identity, quite independent of Barack Obama's, in Chicago. She was professionally extremely successful. She played a civic role. She played a role as a mentor throughout Chicago, which is where I live and where the book is very firmly anchored. Much of the first part of the book is about, the first part of the book is entirely about Chicago and that world. She arrives in Washington, January 2009, and what a bizarre world it is, as Kenneth has begun to discuss, and as I'm sure he writes about in his book. She gets there, and have you heard what it is she said she would really want now that she lives in what's called the bubble, the security bubble? She said, what I most want to do, I want to drive with the window down in my car. The security situation and the Secret Service rules are so strict, they can't roll the window down. Barack Obama says, what I'd like to do? I'd like to sit on a park bench alone, because you can't do that. You can't live that way. They went out on a date night, and they went to New York, and the media follows him everywhere. That's how it works, in case something goes bad. And so one day she was asked about date nights and why they didn't seem to be having any. And she said, oh yeah, right. There are 19 cars. You got the ambulance behind. In the car that they drive, the big, huge limousine, 7.5 tons, doors made out of titanium, just like airplane doors. Some blood with the president's blood type in the back, just in case something goes wrong. And she says, yeah, really romantic. That's what's really, really fun. So she arrives in the White House, and she has to figure out who she's going to be and what she's going to be about. And what do we think we know about her? What do we imagine? Who is the Michelle Obama whom we picture? And of course, many people think of her arms and her fashion, and she's pretty darn different. She knows how to use the media. She's certainly the first lady who would feed kale chips on late night television to 2 comedians dressed in drag. And she does tugs of war, and she is on every social media platform invented. And if there are more platforms invented before they leave in a year, she will be on those. I think there's hardly any doubt about that, because she too wants to reach her target audience for the things that she cares about. And so we think of her as striding incredibly confidently through life. And as I embarked on the book, having covered her and covered Barack Obama for the Washington Post for several years, that was the image I had of her too. I mean, what self-doubt could Michelle Obama possibly have? And as I began to peel back the layers and talk to her friends and her relatives and people who had mentored her, people she had been a mentor to, I found this other side of her. It was striking that when Barack Obama met her in Chicago at the law firm of Sidley and Austin, when she had graduated from Harvard Law School and he was just finishing his first year, he said he saw something in her that surprised him, a vulnerability, a sense, as he put it, that life was terrifyingly random, that she had been through a lot, and risk-taking wasn't actually her strong suit. She wanted everything to be, she wanted some control, and she wanted success, and she was going to be really prepared. And she was asked about this, she was asked about herself, interestingly enough, on a show she was on 106th and Park, which was on BET. It's not on anymore. And the announcer, the MC interviewer, put a picture of Michelle Obama in a public high school in Chicago when she was a teenager on the screen and said, Mrs. Obama, what are you thinking there? And she said this. She said that girl was always afraid. I was thinking, maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe there are kids working harder than me. I was always worried about disappointing someone or failing. And in 2011, in November, she was speaking to a group of high school kids at Georgetown University. And somebody asked her a question about being First Lady. And she said, oh my gosh, I don't really know always what I'm doing or why. You know, I was always worried about disappointing my parents. And I'm still kind of worried about disappointing my parents. You know, her mother lives in the White House. Her father passed away. She said, and I'm worried about disappointing the American people. So she has this kind of remarkable ability to look inward and understand herself and yet be purposeful. And when I set out to write the book, which I spent more than 4 years on, I was trying to figure out, where did those attitudes come from? How was it that she chose to do what she's doing? And what were the influences in her life? I went back to her father. She said on the campaign trail, you might remember, in 2008, the voice I hear inside my head when I'm trying to figure out if I'm making a good decision is my father's voice. So who was Fraser C. Robinson III? You know, we know from the sort of glossy campaign biographies or, story, well, he worked for the city water plant. He had multiple sclerosis. He worked in Mayor Daley's Democratic organization as a precinct captain. Well, I went looking, and I went back to DuSable High School. He was in the class of '53, and I found a classmate who had a yearbook. The first full-page photo in the DuSable High yearbook of 1953 is of Michelle Obama's dad sculpting a bust. And it turned out that her father really wanted to be an artist. He took classes as a young boy at the Chicago Art Institute, which was a very unusual thing, as you can imagine, for a young African-American boy in Chicago, working class in the 1940s and 50s in a deeply segregated city. She talks about her grandparents, her grandfathers, both of whom came north in the Great Migration. Her grandfather, Fraser C. Robinson Jr., came from Georgetown, South Carolina to seek his fortune, and it didn't go very well. Chicago was not a very easy place to get around, and if you read Richard Wright, who came to Chicago at the same time, you know what that meant. And he had some pretty tough times, and he was an important figure in Michelle Obama's life, Michelle Robinson's life at the time, and he was tough, and some people thought he was kind of mean, and he had a message that you'd better recognize that racism exists, because you're gonna have to confront it. That's how life is around here, but you'd also better not let it get you down. It was a message that countless African Americans heard then and many hear now. And he said, and this is a line she uses on the campaign trail, your destiny was not written before you were born. And if you think about the messages that Michelle Obama is sharing today, the audiences she chooses to speak to, they are usually high school and college kids, usually kids of color, especially black girls. She shares these lessons that she heard growing up in Chicago, all around the country, and now actually around the world. So that was the story I was piecing together to hear her kind of where that all came from. And she says, I'm a statistical anomaly. I am not supposed to be here. She said this at different points through her life, at Princeton, at Harvard, certainly in the White House. And so what did she choose to do? What is she doing now? We think of her as doing easy things. In fact, there's a feminist critique of her, largely a white feminist critique of her, that, well, you went to Princeton and Harvard, and this is all you can manage for the country, right? She graduated, with honors from Princeton. She was at Harvard Law School, where she thought very, very deeply. I talked with her mentors there, her professors at the time. One, Charles Ogletree, said, when Michelle Obama was here 30 years ago, everything she did, everything she thought about was about race and gender and reaching back and giving back and trying to make a difference. So you see these threads that carry through to the White House. And so we can see on the one hand that she cares about childhood obesity. That's kind of mom and apple pie. She cares about military families. That's kind of safe and easy. She wants everybody to go to college. That's safe and easy. But if you just look below the surface and you think where she came from and the stories that she has heard and the ways she's trying to make a difference, everything she's done in this 20-year career and in the White House is actually about helping people who don't have voices, people who actually are not doing so well in this economy that she spoke about in such startling terms for many people in 2007. So startling that people, in fact, reined her in. The Obama campaign reined her in because they didn't want her to be perceived as the angry black woman, which is a stereotype that's never fit her. And so if you look at obesity, well, why does that matter? Why does school lunches that we sometimes joke about matter? Well, guess what? As you probably know, 30 million kids in America get school lunches, buy them. 20 million of those kids get them at a reduced price. And so for many of those kids, that's the only meal they're going to have, or the best one. And so it's not just about nice food for suburban kids, after all. And if you think about what she's doing with military families and trying to get jobs, well, sure, there's a war on. It's patriotic. She shows her bona fides. But 80% of service members, in fact, only have high school education. So she's not trying to get jobs for the guys in defense intelligence, right? She's trying to help soldiers and their partners try to get ahead. And then finally, what she's doing now with Reach Higher, her current initiative, which is to try to get kids who don't have a very good shot at college to reach for something more, to help them get into college or a trade school. And I think her legacy will be this message, or certainly she hopes that it will be this message and this mission that is actually far deeper than is sometimes perceived. I think actually, in some ways, she's the most political first lady we've had since Eleanor Roosevelt. Not political in the get the vote out and measured in Washington terms of who's up and who's down. Political in the sense of having a purpose and an agenda and carrying through quite consistently throughout. I was struck by, I want to sort of wrap up with, people sometimes ask, well, what's she going to do? And I believe her when she says she doesn't know. They'll finish in a year. She'll be 53 years old. Malia will be off at college. Sasha will still have 2.5 years to go. She has said if Sasha wants to stay in Washington and finish at Citadel Friends, they'll do that. Interestingly enough, that would put them in Washington for 2 more years, unusual for an ex-president and his partner. But she was at a dinner party. They don't go out. They started by saying that the date nights are not so romantic because it's such an awkward thing to have to do. So they invite people in, and lo and behold, people go. People actually they want to go to the White House on a Friday night and sit and have dinner with the president and the first lady. And these dinners go on and on and on. And at one of these, several people I know were there, in a party of 10 or 12 people. And this particular night, she's sitting on the couch, it's after midnight, and she says, when I leave here, I'm going to be just like Barbara Bush. Now that's surprising to a lot of people. And there was silence, just as there is here today with you guys. And so somebody said, you mean like the 3 strands of pearls? That's what you're going to do? She says, no, when I get out of here, I'm going to say whatever the hell I want to say. And so we can look forward to that moment and what her next act is going to be, even though we don't know exactly what that will be. But I'm confident we have not heard the last of her. But what we will hear from her is this story that is so deeply anchored in Chicago and the world that she grew up in. So thanks for that. And we are happy to take, Kenneth and I are happy to take questions. Talk about whatever it is on your mind. I think that, I think our stories actually dovetail pretty significantly. Exactly. Yes.
Absolutely, and I'll go ahead and moderate. So if you would just step toward the microphones with your questions, and we'll rotate from one side to another. And please specify whether your question is directed toward Mr. Walsh or Mr. Slevin.
Peter, a question for you. The autobiography seems like it's not authorized from your talk. So my 2 questions did you try to get it authorized, and what is Michelle's response to it? And the second is, when you went around talking to her mentors and stuff, having it be unauthorized, did you talk about the process? Did people ask you whether it's authorized or?
Sure. No, Joel, that's a very good question, Joel. Before I did the book, I'd already spent a long time covering the Obamas for the Washington Post. I'd done some deep stories for the paper way back in the first campaign and even before that. I went to the East Wing, where the First Lady operates, and I said, I want to do this book. I think she deserves a book where she is at the center of her own narrative. She is not just wife of the more famous Barack. I'm not going to ask right now if I can interview her, and I don't want that label of authorized because that causes its own problems. This will be an independent job. You know my work. I would like to have access to people on her staff. And when someone calls, as they do, because Michelle's friends are extraordinarily loyal, and when they call and say, hey, this guy called, can I talk to him? I would like you to say to that person, you decide. You work it out with him. If you trust him, that's up to you. And I had that relationship for a good while. I would have loved to have talked with her, and she was not made available to me after the first campaign when I did interview her a couple of times. But I would go to people, friends of theirs, relatives of theirs, relatives of his, of Barack's, and explain what I was up to. And I would say, look, I'm trying to do an ambitious book, a thoughtful book, and a book that I hope will endure, that gets at who she is and why she cares about the stuff she cares about. I ask you to trust me, essentially, or I was asking them to trust me, and I'm happy to report that most people did.
Thank you for the question. Next side.
I have one comment for each of you. I always say that in 10 years when hopefully, optimistically, our health care costs are way down, the person who would be most responsible is Michelle Obama. Because if you eat well now, and you take care of yourself now, it shows up in the succeeding decades. So, that's just...
It's an important point, and it speaks to the celebrity side of things and to the polarization, the political polarization in this country, that the childhood nutrition law that she supported in 2010 involved scientists defining what nutrition should be, and yet when she announced it, she did it in a very Michelle way. She did not just do a quick little photo op. She gave a speech that was 5,600 words long, anticipating all of the criticism that she would eventually get.
And the other is that I always felt that Johnson never got his just due as to how great a president he was domestically, because he had big ears and a funny accent.
Yeah.
And seriously, we didn't take him seriously.
Well, I was president as a young man, and the Vietnam War overrode everything else with Lyndon Johnson for so many people after the initial period when the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, which were very important. But, you had 50,000 Americans losing their lives in Vietnam, and many, many tens of thousands grievously wounded. The country was ripped apart by that war. And, historians basically, I think, agree with you that for the first part of Johnson's presidency, he was headed to be one of our greatest presidents because of his legislative accomplishments. The Vietnam War ruined his presidency, and even his closest admirers will say that. And by the end of his presidency, when he was when he was retired in Texas, remember, he grew his hair. He was actually looking like a lot of the young protesters, and he said, "I just wish I had been able to communicate better with the young people what I was trying to do, but maybe they'll understand someday." But the problem is that Vietnam War was such a burden for him that he recognized at the end. And of course, he didn't run for re-election in 1968. So, but I think the domestic agenda, certainly, when that was the main focal point, he was headed for a much greater position in our history than he ended up being.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the interesting responses and for the prompt. We have time for 2 more questions. Sir, on this side.
So I'm just wondering that with the position of the First Lady, now that Hillary's going to run for the presidency, we're looking at the bigger picture, and that if she is successful, do we have to look into the future as to the White House being the first family as opposed to a First Lady, because now we're going to be extended to 16 years, one person or one family possibly occupying office. I mean, that's a new change.
Right. Well, a couple of quick points. Peter reminds me about Barbara Bush. When I remember a year or so ago, she said, talking about speaking your mind, "I don't want Jeb to run for president. We've had too many Bushes already. We have certainly more than 2 families who can run the country, the Bushes and the Clintons." Jeb shows up at a rally when he decides to run, and a disembodied voice comes at the end of the rally during the question period, Jeb, it's Mom. I've changed my mind. I think you should run. But she does speak her mind. And I think that the question, to get to your point, is if Hillary Clinton is elected, Bill Clinton, can he resist jumping back into public policy? He still loves it. And a lot of people who know them feel they've been surprised at how restrained he's been in keeping in the background. Now, people ask him, what would you call yourself if your wife wins the presidency? First gentleman. He'd still be entitled to be called Mr. President. His joke answer, which is half real, is first dude, he said. So he's got his mind on this. So, but you're right. You're going to have a former president and an incumbent president if Hillary wins. We've never had that before.
But will he work on his arms and his bangs? That's the question. If he really cared.
Yeah. Well, that raises another whole question about his appeal in general, and that's another question we have yet to resolve, is that how much that side of him is going to be restrained. We can hope.
Thank you, gentlemen, sir. We have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
My question relates to what I think is obscene cashing in of presidents on their celebrity. I believe when Harry Truman left office, he really did not make speeches thereafter and get paid $500,000. So I'm just wondering where you trace the beginnings of this cashing in and how appropriate do you think it is?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. Harry Truman did not do this. In fact, he was very critical of presidents who did do it. He said, I would never consider cashing in on my time as president. It was such a great honor to have been president. But, I mean, you can trace some of this, frankly, to Gerald Ford, who left office, was not a wealthy man, and then was making big speeches, was serving on corporate boards and so on. Since then, the amount of money these presidents make is astounding. President Reagan gave a speech in Asia, and he made $6 million. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton have made $100 million easily since they've been president in the White House. They say, well, we had to make money. We never had a lot of money. Part of that is true, but to what extent do you do that? Each president has to resolve that himself or herself, but I think the precedent is gone now that they limit themselves. They make as much money as they can, frankly. I don't know if the Obamas will do that. I mean, they'll need to have some income, but I suspect they'll be more restrained. But it's a real problem in a post-presidency. And the other quick point is, Jimmy Carter has limited himself in doing this, and so a lot of people feel they admire him for having a presidency that was not considered very successful, but having a terrific post-presidency, partly because he has not cashed in on it and has devoted himself to charitable and good works.
I think this is one of the things that will be fascinating to see as the Obamas leave the stage. They will be very young. They'll both be in their 50s when January 20th, 2017 comes around. One early clue is that Barack Obama's created a foundation that will will build his library in Chicago. It'll be an urban library. It'll be in one of 2 neighborhoods on the south side that need help. And he has made clear to his friends he does not intend to go out and raise extraordinary amounts of money himself, and he wants it to be not just a foundation, not just a library, but a community center that does something good for the neighborhood in which Michelle Obama grew up. They obviously will be able to make extraordinary sums of money, but it'll be very interesting to see how they navigate that. They will be, just when Barack Obama signs his first book contract, they'll have probably enough money to live on forever. Some people ask whether Michelle Obama will run for president, just as Hillary did, and I defer to Barack Obama on that one. He was asked by a commentator who said, so suppose I told you 10 years from now that your wife was running for president of the United States. And he said, I would think she had been abducted by aliens. I don't think we will see that part of the Clinton legacy repeated.
So some great questions, very fascinating commentary, gentlemen. I'd like to remind you that, again, book signing will begin immediately. Just to the right, just a couple tables down, you can purchase the books as well. I want to thank you so much for your attendance and attention. And again, thank you, gentlemen, for a wonderful presentation. Have a great day and enjoy the book fair.
Sure. You deal with
My pleasure. My pleasure. Let me walk you to the signing area.
Okay.
You are